Hello everyone, Jeff Stevens here again for CultGame. It's been a while since I last posted here, but that's just fine because work is going swimmingly right now. We're going full speed ahead on things. But yeah, I was in Europe for a bit, and now I'm back, and I'm here at my house and out on the porch sitting for a little while, just talking. And we're going to give you all an update on what's been going on. So glad to get into it. So the first thing that we want to talk about, at least for a lot of the work that's being done right now, is refactoring. So I came back to CultGame after working maybe a year and a half at a software position at a business here in my city, and we learned quite a bit about web development and a lot of the frameworks and the general design patterns used in software. You can go to school for computer science like I did, but they'll teach you computer science. They won't teach you programming per se. So it was very helpful coming back with that experience, and now I'm doing a lot of refactoring, as programmers like to say. And refactoring, for people who aren't aware of programming lingo, is going back and rewriting code to make it more efficient, easier to work on, more durable, and more scalable. Just making code better than it once was or was once written, but making the code accomplish the same thing or close to the same thing. So that's the mainstay of what's going on, and then I'll explain that for a little bit and talk about sort of um, the design challenges of that and some of the funniness of what went on beforehand, because it is entertaining. And then we'll also show off some of the box art for the game, which has been created, and we're very happy with how it turned out. So stay tuned for that. Alright, so here's what I was talking about when I mean I have something to refactor. So this was previously how data for cults in CultGame was stored. So you had like a cult and then information about it. And what I would do with my old design is I would say, okay, well, I would write notes up here and say, I have this vector or this list of items, right? And in the first spot, I'm going to keep the name. And in the second spot, I'm going to keep the guy who leads it. And in the third spot, I'm going to keep the number of followers. And in the fourth spot, I'm going to keep a resource like theological power. Now, programmers who are looking at this right now, their eyes are probably burning, and they're very upset. But for other people who don't have much programming experience, this might seem all right. This might seem, oh, yeah, there's nothing wrong with this, right? It's a way of keeping information. Well, that's correct, but until you understand what this means that every time I have to get information from this cult, I have to go to the place where I made all these notes and go, okay, I want to get the name, and to get the name of a cult, I would do this, right? Or excuse me, the name, yeah. Or to get to whenever I needed to get the number of followers, I would have to do something like this. And this would be interspersed through all the code, and it would not read very well. And in addition to there's different types of data in here. There's numbers and there's words, and when you mix those, it gets very difficult for understanding what's what. Because when I'm trying to compare numbers, let's say I'm trying to compare the number 300 to another number that's unknown and figure out which one's bigger, I have to specifically tell the computer that this is not a word, because at least when quotation marks are around a string of characters in the C++ programming language, it thinks that I'm looking at a word, or what we call a string, and it doesn't think it's a number. So there's a lot of what's wrong here is it's hard to read. It's hard to reference. It's hard to know what type of object I'm looking at. So this is not good. This is a design pattern that we want to stay away from. And a way that we change this is through learning object-oriented programming and doing something like this. So better. I'll say the better one is below. And the better one is we create a class. And a class, we'll call it the faction. I think that's what I did when I was programming this. And a faction class, you can basically you create a instance of something that might be significant, and it can have all these variables associated with it that can have different types, and that's great. So I can make the name of the cult a string, or say faction name, and then I can just set that up here, and then I can make leader name, make that a string as well. This is not how it exactly looks in the implementation, but it gives you an interesting idea. And then the follower count, I can have that be an integer instead of a string, so that's really nice. And then I can have the theological power also be an integer. So this is a better way to design what I was talking about earlier with instead of having everything stored in really long lists, the data for a cult as the game gets bigger could have like maybe hundreds of these little indexes, and I have to memorize what each one would be. But instead here, whenever I want to reference one of these variables, all I have to do is I make a faction. If I want to make a new faction, I do something like this. New faction is equal to faction, so that constructs it, and then I want to get the name of the new faction. Just do faction name. That's a lot better than trying to do something like this where I would do cult.0. That looks a lot better. So there were bad design patterns all around my project, like this first blunder I just showed you, that really made me question what the heck I was doing at the time after coming back from a place with professional standards. There were other bad design patterns, though, and one of these was defining every function or everything at the global scope in the code. And this is the equivalent of trying to cook in a kitchen where literally every ingredient has been taken out of the pantry cabinets and refrigerator and is sitting all on your countertop. And yes, and it feels, you could still make a meal that way, right? But it would feel very uncomfortable, and you don't have much workspace, and it's hard to look at it. It's very much an eyesore, right? Very messy. So the last major design blunder I want to talk about when I was working on CultGame previously was the idea of putting in circular dependencies. And if you're working in a framework or a different environment where you have all of what we call dependency injection set up for you, this is the process of taking code from different libraries and sources that you might need to do little things, like taking little toolboxes and tools that you've downloaded from the internet and using them to help make your project, putting those in your project. That's dependency injection. Getting that set up in such a way such that the tools that you're importing don't depend on other tools that you're injecting or importing at the same time, such that you have a chicken or the egg situation where you're injecting one dependency but it needs another, and that dependency that it's being injected it gets into a loop. It's not good. So anyways, this I wanted to mention this because I got a book, and this book is called Code Complete, and I'm going to show you guys a page from it right now that I really like. So this is the book I wanted to show you, Code Complete. It's really good for learning how to do software. Engineering and architecture, but there's a chart in here that's very interesting. It's the average cost of fixing defects based on when they're introduced and when they are detected. So I mention this because when I first encountered my dependency injection issues, or issues where I chose to make bad architecture early on, I was initially okay with it being bad because I wanted to push through it. But this shows you how costly it is to make a bad decision early on and needing to fix it later, where the numbers on the chart represent the factor of time/money it's going to cost you to fix an issue if it's introduced early on and fixed early on versus fixing it later in the process. So if you have like a architecture requirement that during the architecture design phase of your software, it's going to just cost you a factor of 1 to fix it. But if you wait all the way into post-release, it's going to cost you up to 100 times as much
to fix that same issue. So it's very important that if while you're designing sort of the core architecture or the systems of your software, your game, or yeah, just software game, I think it applies to this. This study that they're citing here shows that you need to fix those problems early, or else it will cost you dearly. And dearly it has cost me because I'm just having to rewrite some stuff.
So I suppose that's what's been going on. Uh, I have been more experienced and I have gone back to CultGame and I have realized that I have outgrown the work that I had previously done and I need to remake it. And I don't think this is unique for any developers who've worked on projects. Maybe people can relate to me in the comments, but I know a specific issue of this, or instance of this rather, was the famous developer Phil Fish, who was featured in the indie game, the movie documentary, back in maybe the early 2010s or something like that, when he worked on a game called Fez. Very famous game. It's a pretty interesting game, very good game. I enjoyed it. But his development process took him 5 years. He was a proud solo developer who did a lot of his stuff on his own. I'm pretty sure almost everything was on his own. I'm not 100% sure. But it took him 5 years to make the game, and the documentary, or rather the Wikipedia page I just read, said that the almost none of the work from the first 2 years of the development process made it into the final product. Just think about that. I mean, you have to, of course, grow and decide, what's better, what's worse. But still, imagine spending 2 whole years of work on something that no one would ever really benefit from or see, or that's pretty crazy. So, this is just a testament. I mentioned this because it's a testament to you can outgrow your project. You can come back to it later and you can outgrow it. And Phil Fish, I believe, if I recall the documentary correctly, redid all of the art in his game 3 times because he finished it once, did other work for a bit, and then came back later and decided he could do it better. And he did that twice. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And I guess I mention all of this because you can get stuck in development hell as a developer or as a person who's working on any sort of personal project, is you can come back to your work. Your process takes you so long that the earlier work is not you anymore. You've outgrown it and you can do it better. So I guess my personal takeaway for this is that as indie developers, we should strive to start, solo developers too, strive to make small projects because it's just us, and the game development process is very long. And if you extenuate it by any sort of means, if you extend it, it's going to you're going to outgrow some of your other stuff that you're doing. So the last update I want to share in this video with you all today is the box art for CultGame. And I've been working with Portuguese artist for video games, Fran Matos, very skilled, nice guy who developed this for us. And I did a little bit of the direction on it. And without further ado, here it is. So we're very proud of how it turned out. From my standpoint as the director, I wanted to do something that felt like classic Western religious artwork, but also had the edge of the metal album covers by John Dyer Baisley. And it also, I wanted a little bit of an ASCII art aesthetic. I wanted to reference a bit of the old box art from like the 90s and 80s with the characters in the art on the box that are stylized differently than the much more minimalist art that would exist in their games. And I feel that suggests there's sort of a things that one might imagine while they're playing the game and not necessarily aren't in the game themselves. I think Fran has done a lot of RPG characters and cultist artwork, so I feel he was really good for the job and turned out great. I'll link Fran's portfolio and his contact information in the description for those interested if you want to hire him or see more of his stuff. But yeah, you'll be seeing this on the store page and maybe even on some merchandise. We'll figure it out. But yeah, until then, thank you for watching, and I really appreciate all the interest and supportive words and anyone who's just wants to learn a little bit. So anyway, take care.